Mara Sullivan drove a hunting knife into the throat of the man who'd tracked her across 3 states and didn't flinch. She wiped the blade on his coat, pulled Eli behind her without a word, and kept walking. That was Tuesday. By Friday, she was standing at the base of a mountain so brutal it had already swallowed 24 women whole, staring up at whatever waited at the top and thinking, good. Let it try. If this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every single word of what comes next matters. The letter had found her in a Colorado boarding house, slipped under the door in the dead of night, like something ashamed of itself. Mara hadn't touched it for a full hour. She'd sat on the edge of the bed with her pistol across her knees, watching the thin strip of candlelight beneath the door, listening to the silence, the way a woman listens when she's spent years learning that silence sometimes breathes. Eli was asleep against her side, one small fist curled beneath his chin, his breath coming in that shallow, quick rhythm she'd learned to fear. Even asleep, her boy braced for impact. Even in dreams, he ran. She finally picked up the letter. Mrs. Sullivan, or whatever name you're traveling under now. My name is Reverend Caleb Hurst of Redemption Creek, Idaho. I represent the interests of Mr. Tobias Montgomery, a man of means who requires a wife. The compensation is considerable. The arrangement is legal. The location is remote enough that no one who might be looking for you would think to look there. I trust you understand my meaning. If you are interested, be at the northern trailhead of Frost Ridge by the 1st of December. Come prepared for winter. Come prepared for longer. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time slower, picking apart every word, the way she'd learned to pick apart a loaded room, figuring out where the exits were before she decided whether to walk in. Remote enough that no one would think to look. That was the sentence that did it. She folded the letter, tucked it into the inside lining of her coat, and looked at her sleeping son for a long time. Eli, she said softly. He was awake in an instant. That was the other thing about her boy. He'd stopped being a child the night she'd had to pull him out a back window with one hand while she fired blind into the dark with the other. He didn't sleep deep anymore. He hadn't in 2 years. We moving? He asked. His voice was flat and practical, the voice of a boy who'd learned not to waste breath on panic. Yeah, baby, she said. We're moving. Where? Mara stood, reached under the floorboard where she kept the things she couldn't afford to lose, and started packing. Idaho, she said. That's far. That's the point. He didn't argue. He never argued. That broke something in her every time she thought about it. A 9-year-old boy who'd already learned that arguing was a luxury, that survival required compliance, that the world punished people who asked too many questions. She'd vowed silently and savagely that she would spend whatever years she had left teaching him the opposite, that he had the right to push back, that his voice mattered, that they were going to find somewhere that proved it. She just hadn't figured out where that somewhere was yet. Idaho apparently was as good a guess as any. The journey took 11 days. By the time they reached Redemption Creek, Mara had spent all but $40 of what she'd scraped together, had slept with her back against a wall every single night, and had twice spotted men she recognized from Donovan's crew watching the roads south of the Montana border. She'd turned them around both times by doubling back through country so rough that anyone who followed had to want it bad enough to earn it. Nobody had wanted it that bad. Not yet. Redemption Creek was the kind of town that looked at strangers the way a dog looked at an unfamiliar hand. Not quite hostile, not quite welcoming, just reading, calculating, deciding. The main street was packed hard with old snow. The buildings leaned into each other like men at a bar propping themselves up. 3 women in heavy wool coats stopped talking the second Mara walked past them, and she felt their eyes on her back like fingers pressing between her shoulder blades. She kept walking. Eli stayed half a step behind her, which was his way. He didn't cower, didn't shrink. He positioned himself where he could see what she saw without being in front of her line of sight. She'd taught him that. It had taken less time than it should have to learn. She found the Reverend's office above the general store, up a flight of stairs that groaned under her weight with every step. She knocked twice. Heard nothing, knocked again harder. "Come in if you must," said a voice inside. She came in. Reverend Caleb Hurst was older than she'd expected. 70 if he was a day, with the dry, papery look of a man who'd been a long time in cold country. He sat behind a desk, stacked with papers and ledgers, and he looked at her over the rims of wire glasses with an expression that was hard to read. Not unkind. Not warm either. Somewhere in between where a man sat when he'd seen too many versions of too many stories to commit to feeling anything about any of them. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right," she said. His eyes moved to Eli. The letter didn't mention a child. The letter also didn't ask. He considered that. His fingers folded together on the desk. Mr. Montgomery's previous arrangements did not include children. "Then I expect you'd better tell me how many of those arrangements worked out," she said, "and we can decide together whether the pattern is worth repeating." A pause. Long enough that she heard the wind push against the single window behind him. 24 women, he said finally. Across 4 years. Not one stayed longer than 10 days. Why not? The isolation, most would say. The mountain. The man himself. He paused again. "Mr. Montgomery is not an easy person. Reverend." Mara said, "I just spent 11 days riding across 3 states with a child and a wanted notice nailed to every post between here and Denver. I haven't slept flat in 2 weeks. I've got $40 a rifle, 2 knives and a pistol I know how to use on anything that moves. I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for defensible." Hurst looked at her for a moment that stretched long and careful. Then something shifted in his face. Not warmth exactly, recognition maybe. The look of a man who finally heard a word he understood. "He'll send a man down with a mule in the morning," he said. "The trail up takes most of the day. There's a room at the boarding house where you can clean up and rest. We'll need 2 rooms. There's only one. It has 2 beds. That'll do," she said. "Send a meal up, something hot, for the boy especially." She turned for the door. "Mrs. Sullivan?" She stopped. Didn't turn around. 24 women, he said again, and his voice was careful now, like a man measuring rope. Women younger than you, stronger than most. 3 of them had survived genuine hardship. Not one of them stayed. Now she turned. "What's your point, Reverend?" she said. He held her gaze. "I suppose I'm wondering what makes you different." Mara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Every single one of those women came here to be chosen, to earn a place, to make themselves small enough to fit whatever shape he needed." She reached back, put her hand briefly on Eli's shoulder. "I'm not here to fit anything. I'm here because I need high ground, I need distance, and I need somewhere nobody's going to come looking for 2 years without a very good reason." She let that sit. "I don't care if he's difficult. Difficult I can work with. Difficult is better than dead." She walked out. Eli fell into step beside her on the stairs. After a moment he said quietly, "Is he going to be mean?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Will he hurt us?" She stopped on the bottom step and looked at her son straight on. His dark eyes were steady on hers. No tears in them, he'd run out of those a long time ago. Just that watchful, patient look waiting for her to tell him something real. "If he tries," she said, "I will stop him, like I've stopped everyone else." Eli nodded once. The way he nodded when he was filing something away, when he'd decided to believe her. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. And they went to find the boarding house. She didn't sleep much. She lay on top of the covers with her pistol at her side, listening to Eli breathe in the other bed, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought about Tobias Montgomery, the way she thought about anything she was walking toward, clinically carefully without sentiment. 24 women. 4 years. 10 days at most. She'd heard whispers at the general store while she was buying a few supplies with what she had left. Not much people in small towns learned to be careful about what they said to strangers, but she'd caught fragments. A woman at the dry goods counter who'd looked at Eli and then at her and then away fast. A man at the door who'd said something under his breath she didn't quite catch, but whose tone was unmistakable. That mountain'll eat her alive like it ate the rest. Let it try, she thought again. She was up before dawn. Eli was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, lacing his boots with that quiet, focused attention he gave to everything practical. She watched him for a moment, that familiar ache moving through her chest, all the things he should be, and couldn't be, all the things she was going to give him back one day, if she had to claw them out of the earth with her bare hands. "Eat first," she said. "There's bread and salt pork from last night." "I know," he said. "I saved some for you, too." She had to look away for a second. 9 years old. The man who came with the mule was called Perkins, and he was built like a man who'd spent a life carrying other people's problems on his back. He had no small talk in him, which suited Mara just fine. He looked at her luggage, 2 saddlebags, a canvas roll, a rifle scabbard, and nodded like he approved of the economy of it. He looked at Eli and said nothing. He looked at Mara's midsection and her hands and her boots, and whatever calculation he was running behind his eyes produced no visible result. "Trail's rough," he said. "Wind's picking up." "Lead the way," said Mara. He did. The climb was 3 hours and change. The trail wasn't a trail so much as a series of suggestions the mountain made about where a person might put their feet without dying. Ice under the snow in patches that appeared without warning. Wind that came off the ridgeline in sudden, flat-handed slaps. The mule was steadier than Mara expected, and Eli rode it with both hands gripping the saddle horn, not complaining, not asking to stop, just riding. About 2 hours up, Perkins stopped and looked back at her. She'd been walking most of it, giving Eli the mule for the hard sections. "Other women," he said. "I brought most of 'em up this trail." She waited. "The youngest was 19, he said. She made it to the cabin, talked to Montgomery for maybe an hour, came back down in the dark. Alone. Said she'd walk all the way back to town rather than spend another minute up there." "What happened to her?" "Made it fine. Married a blacksmith in Boise last I heard." He paused. "I'm not saying that to scare you." "I didn't think you were," Mara said. "What are you saying it for?" He looked at her a moment. "Trying to figure out if you know what you're riding into." "Man who keeps to himself in a remote mountain cabin," she said. "Grief-struck most likely. Angry probably. Doesn't know how to let people in. Pushes hard to see if they'll run." She tilted her head. "That about right." Perkins looked at her for a long, slow moment. "Close enough," he said. "I've met worse," she said. "Let's keep moving." They crested the last rise about midday, and the cabin came into view. It was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, solid timber, the kind of structure that said its builder had intended to stay. A woodpile stacked head-high against the eastern wall. A smokehouse. A lean-to stable. Tracks in the snow, fresh, going back and forth between buildings. Someone was home and working. As they came into the yard, the front door opened. Tobias Montgomery stepped out. He was exactly what she'd expected in the ways that mattered. Tall, broad-shouldered, built like the mountain had made him rather than the other way around. Dark beard going gray at the edges. Eyes that were pale and direct, and went to her face first before moving to Eli, to the mule, to the bags. He was dressed for cold work. Heavy coat, wool shirt boots that had seen years of hard ground. His hands were bare, and she could see from 20 yards that they were hands that had done real work for a long time. He did not smile. He did not come forward. He stood in the doorway, and he looked at her the way the Reverend had, the way Perkins had, the way the whole damn town had, like she was a problem they were already tired of solving. She walked straight up to him. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, "I'm Mara Sullivan. This is my son Eli. We'll need a room for him private if there's one spare, otherwise we'll partition something off. He sleeps alone, and that isn't negotiable." She didn't stop walking until she was close enough that she had to tip her chin slightly to hold his gaze. "I cook. I can handle livestock. I can track. And I shoot better than most men I've met. I'm not here to make your life pretty or to follow you around looking grateful. I'm here because I need somewhere off the main road for a while. And I gather you need someone who won't bolt the second it gets hard." She held out her hand. "You have questions, ask them. I'll answer the ones I think are your business, and say so on the ones that aren't." He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. Then, slow as anything, he shook it. His grip was hard and deliberate, and she matched it without blinking. "You know why the others left," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected, rougher, like it didn't get used enough to stay smooth. "I've got a theory," she said. "Care to share it?" "They came here to be wanted," she said. "Nobody wants to be somewhere they've got to earn wanting." She released his hand. "I don't need to be wanted, Mr. Montgomery. I need to be somewhere with clear sight lines and good timber and enough distance from the nearest road that somebody'd have to really commit to coming for us. That's all." He studied her. She let him. Then he looked past her to Eli, who had climbed down from the mule and was standing at a respectful distance, watching everything with that quiet, steady attention of his. "How old?" Montgomery said. 9, Mara said. "He talk when he's got something to say." Montgomery looked at the boy a moment longer. Something moved through his face, she couldn't name it. Not warmth, not coldness either. Something older and more complicated than either. "Perkins," he said, not looking away from Eli. "Take the mule to the stable. Mrs. Sullivan, your bags can go inside." He finally moved, stepping back from the doorway. "There's a room at the end of the east hall. Small, but it's got a bolt on the inside." Mara picked up her bags. As she passed him in the doorway, she said quietly, "That's a good start." He said nothing, but she noticed he stepped aside to give her more room than strictly necessary, and she filed that away too. The cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and pine resin, and something like coffee that had been on the fire long enough to get serious about itself. She didn't stop to look at the furnishings, didn't take inventory of his life the way some women might. She went straight to the east hallway, found the small room at the end, set her bags down, checked the bolt, solid old iron, well-oiled, and stood for a moment with her hands at her sides and breathed. Then she went back out. Eli was standing in the main room now, looking at something on the wall, a set of hand-drawn maps she saw, detailed and meticulous, the kind a man drew, because he'd walked every inch of the terrain himself. Montgomery was at the fireplace with his back to the room, adding a log, and didn't turn around. "Those accurate?" Mara asked, moving to stand beside Eli. "Within 50 yards, Montgomery said, still not turning. "The western draw shifts in heavy snow. Rest of it holds." "What's this trail here?" she asked, pointing to a line marked in heavier ink running northeast off the ridgeline. A pause. He turned then and looked at where her finger rested on the map. Something sharpened in his face. "That's a hunting trail," he said. "Goes about 6 miles before it drops into the valley." "Why?" "Figuring out exit routes," she said simply. "Habit." He looked at her, long and careful. "Somebody coming for you," he said. Not a question. "Maybe," she said. "I've been saying ahead of them for 2 years. I expect I can manage a third." "And if they track you here?" She met his eyes. "Then I expect we'd both have a problem worth solving together. Unless that's not something you're interested in." Tobias Montgomery was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls of the cabin like it was deciding whether to come through. "I've been on my own a long time," he said at last. "I noticed," she said. "I'm not—" He stopped. Tried again. "I don't do well with people who want things from me. I want clear sight lines and a bolt on my door," she said. "I told you that already. That's all." She thought about it honestly. "For now," she said. "I can't speak to next year, but for now, that's all." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he looked at Eli again, and whatever that complicated thing was in his face came back quieter this time, pressed further down. "Boy," he said. Eli looked at him straight. "Sir? You eat venison?" A small pause. "Yes, sir." "There's stew on," Montgomery said. "Probably ready." He didn't elaborate, didn't make it an invitation exactly, just stated it. Let it sit. Eli looked at his mother. Mara nodded once. Thank you, Eli said to the man by the fireplace. And Tobias Montgomery, who had driven 24 women off his mountain in 4 years, who had chosen solitude so completely that this entire town had stopped expecting anything else from him, turned back to the fire and said gruffly, almost inaudibly, "Don't thank me yet." But he went to get the bowls himself, and he filled Eli's first. Mara watched that happen, and she didn't let it show on her face, but something in her chest shifted just slightly, just enough to feel like a key in a lock she hadn't known she was still carrying. She sat down across from the man, and she began to learn the shape of him. The long silences, and what lived inside them. The way his jaw tightened when Eli asked a question he wasn't ready for, and the way he answered anyway, short and direct, never talking down. The way his eyes moved to the windows every time the wind picked up checking angles she recognized, because she checked the same ones. He'd been alone a long time, but he wasn't careless about it. He was a man who'd built his isolation deliberately, the way a craftsman built something to last, and she respected that, the same way she respected well-maintained tools. She didn't try to dismantle it. She didn't soften her voice or reach for easy conversation or perform warmth she wasn't feeling. She ate her stew and she watched and she thought about the map and the Northeast Trail and the distances she'd memorized on the ride up. Donovan's men were thorough. They were patient. They'd tracked her across half the continent already, and they hadn't quit, which meant either they had orders that didn't expire or they had personal reasons, and either way, she had to assume they'd eventually exhaust the obvious leads and start thinking creative. The mountain would buy her time. The remoteness would buy her time. But she'd learned the hard way that time was the one currency you could never quite accumulate enough of. After supper, Eli helped clear the bowls without being asked. Montgomery watched him do it and said nothing, but the tightness around his eyes shifted in a way she was beginning to read. When Eli had gone to the small room at the end of the East Hall and bolted the door, she'd listened for the sound of it and heard it, and felt the specific relief a mother felt at that sound. She sat across from Montgomery at the plain table and looked at him. "You have rules," she said. "Tell me what they are." He looked at her. "I mean that practically," she said. "Not as a challenge. I don't like surprises, and I don't expect you do either. So tell me your rules, and I'll tell you mine, and we'll know where we stand." He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "I work from first light. I don't like conversation before coffee. The stable is my space in the mornings, I don't need help there, and I don't want company." "Fine," she said. "Decisions about the property are mine. If you've got an opinion, you can share it. I'll listen. No guarantees." "Fair." "And I don't—" He stopped, his jaw tightened. "I don't talk about my wife." Mara held his gaze steady. "I don't talk about my husband either," she said. "So that works out." Something in his face went very still for a moment. Then he said, "Your rules." "I go armed at all times," she said. "Not negotiation fact. If that bothers you, that's a problem we can't solve." She watched his face. He didn't blink. "Eli is my responsibility and my authority. You can earn a relationship with him, but you don't manage him, discipline him, or override me on anything that concerns him. Not until we've had time enough that I know you and trust the knowing." "Reasonable," he said, quietly. "If I tell you something's wrong, you listen first and argue second. I've survived a long time on instinct, and I have no patience for men who mistake caution for weakness." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been through something serious," he said, not prying, just stating it. "Haven't you?" she said. The fire popped. The wind moved against the walls. Outside, somewhere up the ridge, something, a tree branch maybe, or something else entirely cracked and went silent. They both heard it. They both went still. Then in the same breath they both relaxed, reading the silence that followed and finding nothing wrong in it. She noticed they'd both done it. She thought he noticed too. "You can stay," Tobias Montgomery said at last. You and the boy. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't warmth. It was a verdict measured and final from a man who had sent 24 women away and was apparently keeping this one. Thank you, Mara said. She meant it, wasn't sentimental about it, but she meant it. She went to her room, bolted the door, set her pistol on the floor, where her hand could find it in the dark without looking, and listened to the mountain wind settle into its night rhythm, low, steady, patient, as if it had always known she was coming, and had simply been waiting to see if she was worth the welcome. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 2 years, she slept until dawn. She woke to the sound of an axe hitting wood. Not the panicked scramble she'd lived with for 2 years, hand on the pistol, eyes scanning the door, before her mind caught up with her body. This time, she lay still for 3 full seconds, tracking the sound, placing it, filing it correctly. Tobias, east side of the cabin, steady rhythm working. Not a threat, just a man starting his day. She got up. Eli's door was still bolted from inside when she passed it, and she didn't knock. She moved to the main room, found the coffee already made, and still hot on the iron hook. Over the fire poured herself a cup, and stood at the table thinking. He'd remembered his own rule. No conversation before coffee. He was outside giving her space to have hers. She wasn't sure what to do with a man who did what he said. She drank her coffee, standing up, and listened to the axe, and she thought about the Northeast Trail on the map, and she thought about Donovan, and she thought about all the specific ways this situation could go wrong if she let herself get comfortable too fast. Then she rinsed her cup, checked her pistol, tucked it at her hip, and went to start breakfast. She'd been working at the stove for about 20 minutes when the door opened and Montgomery came in. He stopped when he saw her at the stove. She didn't turn around. "Didn't expect that," he said. "Coffee's still hot," she said. "Eggs'll be done in 10. I assume you've got somewhere to be?" She heard him cross the room, heard the pour. A pause. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know that," she said. "That's why I did it." Another pause, longer. "Right," he said. And he sat down. That was the first morning. It set a pattern neither of them acknowledged out loud, because naming it would have made it fragile, and they were both people who understood that fragile things got broken. By the third morning, Eli came out of his room before she called him, sat at the table across from Montgomery, and asked without preamble, "What are those marks on your hands from?" Montgomery looked at the boy, then at his own hands. The knuckles were scarred in a specific, deliberate way, not from fighting from work. Rope burns, Mara thought. Tools. Years of cold and hard labor. "Trapping," Montgomery said. "Like animal traps." "Like animal traps." Eli considered this. "Does it hurt them? The animals?" Montgomery's jaw moved. "Depends on the trap," he said. "And the animal. Did you ever feel bad about it?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and Mara waited at the stove without turning around to see what the man would do with it. A lot of men she'd found didn't know how to be honest with children. They either talked down or deflected, or told the easy version of the truth that left the child dumber for having heard it. "Yeah," Montgomery said. "Sometimes." "Then why'd you keep doing it?" "Because I needed to eat," he said plainly. "And because I didn't know another way yet." Eli was quiet for a moment, processing. "Did you learn another way?" "I did." "What was it?" "Patience," said Montgomery. "And different tools." Mara set the pan down and turned around, and she looked at the man sitting across from her son at that plain table, and she thought, all right then. It was day 5 when the trouble started. Perkins came up the trail alone, which was unusual. He came once a week with supplies and took Montgomery's orders back to the general store. But he always came on Fridays, and this was a Wednesday, and he was moving faster than his usual unhurried pace. Mara saw him coming from the window of the east hall, before he reached the yard, and something in the set of his shoulders made her pocket her pistol before she opened the door. He came inside without being asked, which was also unusual. "There were men in town yesterday," he said before he'd even fully stepped through the door. "2 of them," came in from the south road. Mara's hands didn't move. Her face didn't change. But something behind her sternum went very cold, very fast. "What kind of men?" Montgomery said. He'd come in from the side room the moment he heard the door, and he was standing very still near the fireplace. "The kind who ask questions without giving reasons," Perkins said. He looked at Mara. "They were asking about a woman traveling with a boy. Said she'd stolen from their employer. Said there was a reward." "How much?" Mara said. Perkins told her. She kept her face level. She felt Montgomery's eyes on the side of her face like a second calculation running alongside her own. "What did people tell them?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Perkins said. "But Mrs. Aldrich at the boarding house, she remembered you. And she's not—" He paused. "She's not a woman who keeps things to herself when there's money involved." Mara nodded once. "How long do we have?" "A day, maybe 2 if the weather turns bad. There's a storm moving down from the north." "Good," she said. "Thank you, Perkins." He looked at her, looked at Montgomery, looked between them like a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. Then he put his hat back on and went back out into the cold. Montgomery waited until the sound of the mule's footfalls faded. "Stolen," he said. "That's what they'd call it," Mara said. "What would you call it?" She looked at him straight. "Survival." A long beat. The fire was the only sound. "Are you going to ask me for the story?" she said. "Or are you going to stand there until I offer it?" "Neither," he said. "I'm going to ask you one question, and then I'm going to let you decide what you tell me." She waited. "Did you do anything that would get an innocent person hurt," he said, "in order to get yourself free?" The question hit her somewhere specific and deep. She felt it the way she felt very precise things, not pain exactly, but the echo of where pain had been. "No," she said. He held her gaze. Then he nodded once slowly. "All right," he said. "That's it," she said. "That's it," he said. She looked at him for a moment with something she couldn't quite organize into a word yet. Then she said, "They're going to figure out the mountain eventually. Even if Aldrich doesn't talk men like Donovan's, they're systematic. They'll exhaust everything else and then start on the improbable." "I know," Montgomery said. He was already moving, going to the corner where he kept his rifle on its rack, running his thumb along the barrel to check it. "How many men does this Donovan typically send?" Something about the way he said it, typically as if this were a logistical problem to be planned around, as if he'd already decided what side of it he was on, made something shift under her ribs again, the same way it had the first night when he'd filled Eli's bowl first. "Last time it was 4, she said. "He wouldn't send less than that." "Last time," he said. "Colorado, before Idaho, 2 years ago." She paused. "There were 4. There are 2 less now." He stopped moving and looked at her. "Self-defense," she said flatly. He looked at her for another moment. Then, "Can the boy shoot?" "He's fired," she said carefully. "Under controlled conditions. He's accurate. But he's 9. A 9-year-old who can hit what he aims at is more useful than an adult who can't," Montgomery said. He wasn't being cold about it. He was being honest the same way he was honest with Eli about the traps and the animal's unpleasant truth delivered without cruelty. "I'm not saying put him in danger. I'm saying know your assets." "I know them," she said quietly. He put his coat back on. "I'm going to check the eastern perimeter," he said. "There are 2 approach trails from the valley that aren't on the map. I'll show you when I get back." "Trails not on the map," she repeated. "I took them off," he said. "A long time ago. Seemed prudent." He was halfway to the door when she said, "Montgomery." He stopped. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Not accusatory. Genuine. He was quiet for a moment. She watched the muscles of his jaw work slightly, the way they did when he was deciding how much truth to spend. "You said you needed defensible," he said finally. "You're in my house. What's in my house is my responsibility." He paused. "And because—" He stopped again. "Because what?" she said. Because 24 women left, he said, and you didn't. And I'm starting to think that matters. He went out before she could answer. Mara stood in the main room for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, his footsteps crunched through the snow and faded going east. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose and breathed out slowly. Then she went to Eli's room and knocked. He opened the door immediately. He'd heard everything she'd known he would. The walls were thick, but not that thick, and Eli had his father's ears among the few things she didn't resent the man for leaving behind. "We might have company coming," she said. "Donovan's," he said. "Probably." He looked at her. His small face was very calm and very steady, and she hated it. Hated the calmness. Hated what had made him this way. Hated that he knew the word Donovan's, and what it meant, and what it had meant before, and what it could mean again. "Are we running?" he asked. "No," she said. "Not this time." Something moved through his face then, fast, small, like a candle flame in a draft there, and almost gone before she could name it. But she caught it. She'd spent 9 years learning to catch the things Eli's face almost said. It was relief. He didn't want to run anymore either. "Okay," he said. "What do I do?" "Right now, nothing," she said. "Stay inside. If I tell you to go to the root cellar, you go. You don't argue, you don't wait, you go." She put her hand on the side of his face briefly. "But I'm not going to let it come to that." "I know," he said. She went back to the main room, and she sat at the table, and she took her pistol apart, and cleaned it, and put it back together again, with the focused, meditative attention she'd learned, gave her hands something true to do when her mind needed to work without interruption. She thought about Donovan. About the shape of his anger, which was not hot but cold, not impulsive, but calculated, the kind of fury that filed itself away and waited and came back organized. He didn't send men out of rage. He sent them out of principle. She had humiliated him by leaving, and then she had compounded it by taking Eli, who was not her son by blood, but was her son by every measure that counted, and Donovan considered Eli a possession, the same way he'd considered her one. That was the thing she'd never been able to make people understand when she tried to explain why she'd run, why she'd fought, why she'd done the things she'd done to get clear of him. It wasn't just about herself. It was about a boy who'd learned to flinch before hands moved, who'd stopped crying before he turned 7 because he'd figured out that crying brought more trouble than it solved. She'd taken Eli the same night she'd taken herself, and she'd keep taking him as far and as fast as she had to until there was no more taking left to do. Montgomery came back inside just before dark. He stood by the fire thawing out his hands, and without looking at her, he said, "East approach is clean. The South Trail has 2 good choke points narrow enough that you can control traffic. I want to show you the second one tomorrow morning." "Before or after coffee?" she said. A brief pause, something that was almost not quite a sound of amusement. "After," he said. "Works for me." He turned from the fire then and looked at her, and she looked back, and there was a moment, just a moment, where neither of them pretended anything. Not strangers trying to be useful to each other. Not a landlord and a tenant. Something else that didn't have a name yet. Something that was being built from practical material the same way the cabin had been built, board by board, intended to last. "There's something else," he said. She set the pistol down on the table. Something in his voice. "When I was in town last month," he said. "Before you came." He stopped. "Montgomery," she said carefully. "I heard something," he said. "At the saloon. Man passing through from Denver talking about a woman who'd killed 2 of Donovan Kane's enforcers in a boarding house outside Colorado Springs." He paused. "Said the woman was heavy-set, dark-haired, traveling with a young boy. Said Donovan had personal feelings about finding her." Mara was very still. "That was why I had Hurst write the letter," Montgomery said. "Why I specified remote location. Why I offered the arrangement." His pale eyes were steady on hers. "I didn't know who you were exactly, but I reckoned if I put a situation out there that was specific enough high-ground distance legal cover, whoever needed it most would find it." She looked at him. "You built a trap," she said slowly. For whoever Donovan was hunting. I built a refuge, he said. For whoever needed one badly enough to climb a mountain in December to get to it. A beat, long and weighted. Why? She said. You don't know me. You didn't know who'd show up. His jaw tightened. He looked away toward the fire and she waited because she was learning that his truth came out on its own timeline and pushing it produced nothing useful. My wife, he said finally. Before she came here. Before she found me. He stopped, tried again. She ran from something too, and there was nobody who built her a refuge, so she ran until she couldn't run anymore and then... He stopped completely. The fire said the rest. Mara didn't move for a long moment. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it the way she meant real things, without embellishment, without apology for the plainness of it. He nodded once, his eyes still on the fire. The 24 women, she said. You weren't trying to drive them away. No, he said, but they still left. They wanted something I couldn't give yet, he said. I wasn't... He stopped. I was still in the middle of it. My grief, my anger. I wasn't ready to let anyone in, and when you're not ready, people feel it and they leave. He finally looked back at her. I didn't write that letter until I thought I might be ready. She held his gaze. Are you? She said. Ready. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind lifted and pressed against the north wall, low and steady. I think, he said, that might depend partly on you. Mara sat with that. She picked it up and turned it over and examined it honestly, the way she examined everything, without sentiment but without dismissiveness either. I'm not an easy person, she said. Neither am I, he said. I've got men coming for me. I know, he said. So do I. She looked at him sharply. What? He met her eyes, and something in his face settled into a new and careful configuration. Donovan Kane isn't just hunting you, he said quietly. He owes me a debt, a very old one. And men like him don't pay debts. They eliminate the witnesses. The fire crackled. Eli appeared in the hallway doorway, quiet as smoke, looking between them. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Mara said, Sit down, Montgomery. I think we need to have a longer conversation than either of us planned on. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Outside, the storm from the north had finally arrived, and the snow came down hard and fast and silent against the walls of the cabin, sealing them in. Sealing the mountain in the way winter sealed everything, eventually completely without apology, as if the cold had always been patient enough to wait for exactly this moment. Eli came to the table without being asked. Mara noticed it the same way she noticed everything about her son, immediately completely filing it away somewhere important. He didn't hover in the doorway. He didn't wait to be invited. He pulled out the chair beside her, sat down, folded his hands on the table the way a man twice his age might, and looked at Tobias Montgomery with those dark, patient eyes. Montgomery looked back at him, then at Mara. He stays, she said simply. A beat. Then Montgomery nodded. Donovan Kane, he said. How much do you know about him? Enough to run from him for 2 years, Mara said. He ran a supply operation out of Denver. Legitimate on the surface, freight, dry goods, livestock brokerage. Everything else underneath. Land, Montgomery said. She looked at him. Yes, land deals. Mostly fraudulent. Mostly targeting people who didn't know enough to fight back. And people who did know enough, Montgomery said quietly. He dealt with differently. Yes, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 8 years ago, I was a deputy federal marshal out of Cheyenne. I had a case against Kane that took 3 years to build. Affidavits, witnesses, paper trails going back to 71. He paused. We were 2 weeks from trial. Mara was very still. What happened? She said. My wife happened, he said, not with bitterness, with the flat, exhausted tone of a man who had said a thing so many times inside his own head that the words had worn smooth. She was called as a character witness against Kane by the prosecution. She knew things, had seen things years before when she was working in Denver. She agreed to testify. He stopped. Kane found out. The fire said nothing useful. They didn't kill her, he said. That would have been too obvious, too clean. What they did was... He stopped again longer this time. His hands on the table were very still and very deliberate, the hands of a man physically holding something down. They arranged for her to be alone, on a road she'd traveled 100 times, and they made sure something happened on that road that looked like an accident, and that I couldn't prove wasn't. Eli made a small sound. Not a word, just a breath that carried weight. The case collapsed, Montgomery said. Without her testimony, and with me unavailable because I was not in a state to be useful to anyone for a considerable period, Kane walked, and I resigned my commission, and I came here, and I have been here ever since. Mara looked at him for a long moment. He knows where you are, she said. He's always known where I am, Montgomery said. I'm not hiding. I'm waiting. Waiting for what? For him to make a mistake large enough that someone with jurisdiction would care again. His pale eyes were steady on hers. Or for him to send men up this mountain so I'd have a defensible reason to finish what I should have finished 8 years ago. The room was very quiet. And then I arrived, Mara said slowly. And then you arrived, he said. And whatever timeline Kane was operating on, you accelerated it. She absorbed this. Eli was watching her face, reading her the way he always did, taking his cues about how alarmed to be from the barometer of her expression. She kept it level. So we're not just dealing with bounty hunters coming for me, she said. We're dealing with Kane's men coming for both of us, at the same time, on the same mountain. Yes, Montgomery said. Well, she said, that simplifies things at least. He looked at her. How does that simplify anything? Because it means we've got the same problem, she said. Which means we've got the same solution. Which means we're working together instead of one of us trying to manage something the other doesn't know about. She looked at him directly. I've had enough of people managing things I don't know about. I won't do it to you, and I need to know you won't do it to me. Agreed, he said. Without hesitation. She put out her hand again, same as the first day. He shook it, same as the first day. But it meant something different now, and all three of them at the table knew it. I want to learn the South Trail, Eli said. Both adults looked at him. You said there were 2 choke points, he said to Montgomery. If they come from the south, you need somebody who knows the angles. I'm small. I can move faster than either of you in tight spaces. He held Montgomery's gaze with a steadiness that made something in Mara's chest ache with pride and grief simultaneously. I'm not asking to fight. I'm asking to be useful. Montgomery looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he looked at Mara. She gave him nothing. This was his call to make, and she needed to see what he did with it. Tomorrow morning, Montgomery said to Eli. After coffee, I'll show you both. Eli nodded. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Montgomery said. Same thing he'd said the first night. But this time, there was something underneath it. Not warmth exactly, but the structural precursor to warmth. The framing going up before the walls. They went to bed with the storm pushing hard against every wall of the cabin, and for the second night in a row, Mara slept without her hand on her gun. She noticed this in the morning, the way she noticed other small changes carefully, without celebrating them prematurely. The South Trail lesson happened as promised. Montgomery showed them both, Mara the tactical overview, Eli the specific positions, the 2 narrows, where a person with steady hands and patience could hold off multiple people coming single file. He showed Eli how to read the snow for approach tracks, without explaining why a 9-year-old shouldn't have to know such things, because all 3 of them had made their peace with shouldn't a long time ago. Eli asked precise questions. Montgomery answered them the same way. Mara watched them together and thought, this is what he would have been, if he'd had time, if she'd lived. She didn't say it. Some thoughts were load-bearing walls and you didn't touch them. It was on the 4th day after Perkins' warning that the first sign came. Montgomery had gone out to the stable to check on the animals, which he did every morning, at the same time, a habit so fixed it had become part of the cabin's rhythm. He came back inside faster than usual. He didn't run. Tobias Montgomery was not a man who ran from things, but his pace was different. Compressed, the walk of a man who'd clocked something and was deciding what to do about it. "Tracks on the east approach," he said. "Fresh, 2 sets, maybe 3. They stopped about a quarter-mile out." Mara was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "Scouting. That's what it looks like. Which means the main group is behind them, still a ways back, letting the scouts determine the layout." She was already checking her pistol. "How long do we have? If they're smart, they'll wait for better weather and come in daylight when they can see. If they're reckless..." He paused. "Tonight." "They'll be reckless," she said. "Donovan doesn't pay by the hour. He pays for results. His men don't have the patience for weather." Montgomery nodded once. He went to the rifle rack. She went to her bags, came back with the second pistol she kept wrapped in oilcloth and had not shown him until now. She set it on the table, checked the load, set it back down. He looked at it. "2 pistols," he said. "I came prepared," she said. "Evidently." "Eli," she said. He was already in the hallway, already watching, already reading the room correctly. "Root cellar." "Not yet," he said. "Eli. I mean, not until they're actually here," he said. "Please, let me be useful until then." She looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Her boy. Her 9-year-old boy with the steady hands and the old eyes and the dignity he'd assembled for himself out of whatever was left after the hard years. "Until they're actually here," she said. "Then you go. No arguments." "No arguments," he agreed. What she didn't expect was what happened 40 minutes later. A knock at the door. Not a battering, not a crash, not the sound of men who'd decided the conversation was over. A knock, 3 times deliberate, the kind of knock that expected to be answered. Montgomery and Mara exchanged a look. She positioned herself to the left of the door, back against the wall, pistol up. He moved to the right, rifle, ready, body angled. She nodded. He opened the door. He opened. The man standing outside was alone. Medium height, trail-worn hands visible and empty, held slightly out from his body in the universal language of, "I am not currently shooting at you." He was younger than she'd expected. Maybe 30, maybe less. His face was half hidden under frost-crusted beard, but his eyes were clear and direct, and looking not at Montgomery, but past him directly at Mara. "I'm not with them," he said immediately. "I need you to know that first." "Who are you?" Montgomery said. The rifle didn't move. "My name is Garrett Cole," the man said. He was still looking at Mara. "Mrs. Sullivan, you don't know me, but you knew my sister, Rachel Cole. She worked in Kane's freight office in Denver. 2 years ago, she helped you get out." The bottom dropped out of Mara's chest. Rachel. Rachel who'd slipped her the false manifest. Who'd told her which freight car would be unguarded. Who'd pressed $2 extra into her hand and said, "Go and don't stop." And who Mara had thought about every single day since, wondering if Kane had found out, wondering what he'd done to the woman who'd helped her. "Where is she?" Mara said. Her voice came out flat and tight, and entirely unlike her usual voice. Cole's face did something complicated and painful. "That's why I'm here," he said. "Kane found out what she did. About 8 months after you left. He didn't kill her." He stopped at the sound Mara made. "She's alive. He's holding her, using her as leverage to make sure his men stay motivated on this." He swallowed. "He told them bring back the Sullivan woman and the boy, and Rachel Cole goes free." "And if they don't?" Mara said. Cole didn't answer. He didn't have to. "Get inside," Montgomery said. He stepped back from the door. Cole came in, moving carefully, hands still visible, the practiced caution of a man who understood he was one wrong move from a very final mistake. Mara didn't lower her pistol. "How many men?" she said. "6, Cole said. They're camped about 2 miles south. They're waiting for the scout report which—" He stopped, looked at Montgomery. "Which hasn't come." "It won't," Montgomery said. Cole took that in. "They'll figure it out by nightfall. When the scouts don't come back, Heller, the man leading them, he'll move early. He doesn't like uncertainty." "Heller," Mara said. The name landed somewhere specific. "Heller's here personally." "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Montgomery. He looked back at her, and she could see him cataloging the same information. She was running the same numbers. Heller was not a hired hand. Heller was Kane's head enforcer. Kane didn't send Heller for ordinary jobs. Kane sent Heller when he wanted something done so thoroughly that it couldn't be undone. "Why are you telling us this?" she said to Cole. "Because Rachel asked me to find you before they did," he said. "She got word to me 6 months ago. Told me what she'd done. Told me why. Told me—" He stopped, and something raw moved through his face. "She said you had a boy with you who deserved a chance. She made me promise." The room was very still. Eli had come out of the hallway without either adult noticing. He was standing near the table, and he was looking at Cole with an expression that was not fear and not hostility, but something measured and ancient, and far too knowing for a child's face. "Is your sister good?" Eli said. Cole looked at him startled. "What? Is she a good person?" Eli said. "Like, does she do the right thing even when it costs her?" Cole's face broke open for just a moment. He pulled it back together, but Mara saw it happen. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She's the best person I know." Eli nodded, looked at his mother. Something passed between them without words, the particular fluency of two people who'd spent years communicating in conditions that didn't allow for volume. Mara lowered her pistol. "All right, Cole," she said. "Tell us everything you know about Heller's approach pattern. And then you're going to help us make sure that when he gets to this mountain, he regrets the decision so thoroughly he carries it for whatever time he has left." Cole looked at her, at Montgomery, at the boy. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They worked through the afternoon, all 4 of them, mapping positions, working through contingencies, using every piece of terrain knowledge Montgomery had built over 4 years of walking every inch of this mountain in every season. Cole knew Heller's methods had been close enough to Kane's operation to understand how his enforcer thought, where he put his men, how he structured an approach when he wanted control of a position. That knowledge laid against Montgomery's understanding of the terrain and Mara's instinct for what a desperate man would do when his plan started breaking apart produced something that began to look less like a defensive position and more like a trap. By the time the light outside shifted toward late afternoon, they had something. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't clean. It required all of them to hold positions in conditions that would test every trained instinct each of them had developed through very different schools over very different years. But it was real, and it was solid, and when Mara sat back and looked at what they'd drawn on the back of an old supply list, she thought, this can work. This actually can work. That was when the first shot hit the cabin wall. Not from the south trail, not from the east approach. From directly above the ridge, the one Montgomery had marked as inaccessible in winter, the one they had not planned for because the snow on that face should have made a traverse impossible. Should have. Cole was on his feet before the echo died. "That's not Heller," he said, and his voice had gone tight and strange. "Heller doesn't move until dark." That's a second shot. Closer. Deliberately closer, the kind of shot that was calibrated to announce something rather than hit anything. A voice came from outside high and carrying, shaped by the ridge to fall directly on the cabin like something dropped from a height. "Montgomery," it called. "Tobias Montgomery. Step outside. This is between you and me. The woman and the boy don't have to be part of it." Montgomery's face changed, not with fear. Mara knew fear on a face, and this wasn't it. What she saw was something older and more organized than fear. The expression of a man who recognized a voice he had spent 8 years expecting to hear again. "Kane," Montgomery said, very quietly. "That's Kane himself," Cole said. He He doesn't come personally, he always sends. He came personally, Montgomery said, because this isn't business. He looked at Mara, and his eyes were very clear and very calm. This is personal. For both of us. Outside, the voice called again, patient as the mountain patient is winter. I'll count to 30, Tobias. After that, I stop being polite. Mara moved to the wall beside the window, pressed her back to it, pistol in hand. She looked at Eli. Root cellar, she said. Mom. Now, she said. And the way she said it, not with panic, not with desperation, but with the absolute flat certainty of a woman who had made this calculation and was completely sure of the answer, made Eli move. He went. Fast and quiet, the way she'd taught him, the way he'd always been able to move when it mattered. Montgomery went to the rifle rack. He took down a second rifle she hadn't seen before. Older, a different configuration, the kind of gun a man kept for a specific purpose. He checked the load with hands that did not shake. The count just hit 15, he said. I know, Mara said. You don't have to be part of this. She looked at him. Montgomery, she said. I have been part of this since the minute I climbed this mountain, and so have you. He held her gaze for one long, still moment. Then let's finish it, he said. The count hit 30 in silence. Then the cabin's front-facing shutter exploded inward. Mara was already moving, dropping below the line of the window, pressing flat against the wall as the second shot came through the space where her head had been. She felt the air move. She did not stop moving. East wall, Montgomery said low and fast. He was across the room, putting himself between the door and the line of fire from the ridge. He's got 2 men up there with him. The angle puts them at the second outcrop. You know it. The notch in the ridgeline, she said. Yes. Direct shot from there into the main room. We can't hold this position. Then we don't hold it, she said. We move. Cole had flattened himself behind the heavy table which he'd dragged against the interior wall the moment the first shot came smart fast. The instinct of a man who'd been around violence enough to know what to do when it arrived. He looked at Mara with eyes that were frightened but functional. The South Trail, he said. Heller's going to hear the shots and move early. I know, she said. That's what we want. He stared at her. You want Heller moving. I want Heller moving on our timeline, not his. Heller moves on our schedule. He comes up that South Trail in a hurry, not a plan. She glanced at Montgomery. How long to get to the south choke point from the root cellar entrance? 2 minutes at a run, he said. She nodded. She was already rethinking the positions, the angles, every calculation they'd spent the afternoon building. Kane on the ridge changed the geometry, but it didn't collapse it. It just required adjusting. Kane wants you specifically, she said to Montgomery, which means he'll keep his men on the ridge to pin us while Heller comes up from the south. He thinks he's running a 2-front squeeze. He's done it before, Montgomery said grimly. It worked before. It worked when he was dealing with people who didn't know he was coming, she said. We know. She checked her pistol, 5 rounds plus the second pistol at her back. Cole, the east window low. You watch that approach and you do not fire until I say. You understand me? Not until I say. Yes, ma'am, he said. She looked at Montgomery. He looked back at her. I'm going out, she said. Mara. It was the first time he'd used her name. They both felt it land, the significance of it, the slight stagger it produced in the middle of everything else happening. He'll keep shooting until somebody responds, she said. If I go out the root cellar entrance and come up behind the ridge, approach from the north side, I can push at least one of his men off that position before they know I'm there. There's 3 of them up there, he said, including Kane. I know, she said. That's not good odds. Montgomery, she said, I have never in my life operated on good odds. I'm very comfortable here. She put her hand on his arm briefly, the same way she sometimes put her hand on Eli's shoulder. Not sentiment. Just contact, the wordless thing that said, I see you and I'm not leaving. Keep them focused on this wall. Give me 10 minutes. He held her gaze for one hard second. Then, 8. 8. She agreed. She went. The root cellar entrance was in the floor of the back storeroom, a heavy trapdoor that opened onto a dug passage extending 6 feet north before it came up through a disguised hatch in the snowpack. Montgomery had built it years ago with the particular foresight of a man who'd spent time as a lawman and understood that every fortified position needed an exit that the person besieging it didn't know about. She came up into the cold fast and flat and stayed down, listening. 2 more shots hit the cabin behind her, and she used the noise to cover the sound of her movement, angling north and east, working toward the base of the ridge approach. She heard Kane before she saw him. Not his words. The wind was wrong for that. But his voice, the tone of it, carrying that particular quality of a man who was accustomed to being obeyed and was starting to be irritated that the usual tools weren't producing the usual results. She placed him at the second outcrop, which put his 2 men flanking him at positions she could now visualize clearly. She didn't think about the cold. She didn't think about the drop from the ridge if she misjudged the footing. She thought about angles, distances, the precise choreography of what needed to happen in the next 4 minutes. She came around the north side of the outcrop fast and quiet, and the first of Kane's men didn't hear her until she was close enough that the gap between his realizing she was there and her pistol connecting with the back of his skull was not large enough to be meaningful. He went down without a sound. The second man turned at the movement, and she was already on him, driving her elbow into his throat in the same motion, catching the rifle before it could clatter on the rock. He went down gasping, and she stepped over him and came around the outcrop and found herself for the first time face to face with Donovan Kane. He was older than she'd expected. That was the first thing. She'd built him so large in her mind over 2 years that the reality of him was almost disorienting. A heavy-set man in a good wool coat, gray at the temples, with the smooth, careful face of someone who'd spent decades making sure his expressions gave nothing away. He held his pistol at his side, not raised, and he was looking at her with an expression that was not surprise. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "I have to say, you exceeded my expectations." "Drop it," she said. Her pistol was leveled and she was standing far enough back that a lunge wouldn't help him. He looked at the gun, then at her face. "You're not going to shoot me in cold blood," he said. "That's not who you are." "You've been chasing me for 2 years," she said. "You don't know anything about who I am." "I know you're not a killer," he said. "You're a survivor. There's a difference." He tilted his head, almost conversational. "You know, I genuinely admired the way you got out of Colorado. Very clean, very fast. Rachel Cole helped you. I was impressed by that. She seemed like such a timid woman." "Don't," Mara said. "She's fine, by the way, in case that's what you're wondering." He said it with complete ease, the ease of a man mentioning something unremarkable. "Uncomfortable, but fine. She'll stay that way depending on how this concludes." Below them, a burst of gunfire from the South Trail. Heller's men moving on schedule. Kane's eyes didn't leave hers. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You and I are going to walk down from this ridge, and you're going to call off whatever defense Montgomery has set up on that south approach, and then we're going to have a reasonable conversation about terms." "Terms?" she said. "You give me the boy," he said, "and you walk away. Different territory, different name, same as you've been doing. I stop looking for you. Rachel Cole goes home. Everybody lives." The cold went so deep it stopped feeling like cold. "Eli," she said, "is my son. Eli," Kane said, "is the legitimate heir to the Coal Creek Land Trust that his biological father signed over to me under duress 6 weeks before that man died in a very unfortunate accident. Eli's signature when he's of age is the one piece of paper I cannot produce myself, because producing it myself would constitute fraud, even by the generous standards I've operated under." He spread his hands slightly, the gesture of a man explaining a simple transaction. The boy signs. The trust transfers. Everyone goes home. She stared at him. She had known about the land. She had not known about Eli's name being on the trust. She had not known that Donovan Kane had pursued them across 3 states, not just for revenge or principle, but because a 9-year-old boy's legal signature was worth more to him than anything else on this mountain. She felt the shape of the last 2 years rearrange itself around this fact, and she felt the specific quality of rage that came from understanding something completely for the first time. "You'll never touch him," she said. Her voice came out very quiet and very final. The voice she used when a thing was entirely decided. "Not ever. Not for any amount of money or land or legal mechanism you can dream up. Do you understand me?" Kane's face shifted. The smooth reasonableness dropped just slightly, and underneath it was something older and less managed. "Then we have a problem," he said. "Yes," she said. "You do." She didn't hear Montgomery coming. She felt him, the slight change in the air, the compression of presence, the particular quality of a large, deliberate man moving with complete intention. He came around the south side of the outcrop, and he looked at Kane, and Kane looked at him, and between them was 8 years of accumulated weight pressing down on both sides of a scale that had never been balanced. "Tobias," Kane said. And for the first time his voice carried something genuine, not quite fear, but the precursor to it, the body's report that a situation had developed beyond the planned parameters. "I've been waiting a long time for this conversation," Montgomery said. He had the older rifle up, leveled steady. "I want to hear you say it. What you did to Margaret. Out loud where she would have heard it if she were still here." "Montgomery, say it." The wind off the ridge was the only sound for a long moment. Then from below them came a sound that stopped everything. A boy's voice. Clear, carrying, absolutely certain of itself. "Heller, stop where you are, Eli." Mara's heart did something violent in her chest. She did not move her pistol off Kane. She did not look away. But every part of her that was a mother and not a combatant was screaming. "He's out of the root cellar," Montgomery said very low without moving. "I know," she said. Her voice didn't shake. She needed it not to shake. Another shot from below, not at the cabin, not at anything she could place, and then Cole's voice, sharp and commanding. "Stand down, drop it now." A crash, a struggle. Then silence. Then Cole's voice again. "We've got Heller. He's down. The others are running." Kane heard it. She watched him hear it, watched the calculation run behind his eyes, the rapid assessment of a man who had just seen 3 things he'd relied on fail simultaneously. His men on the ridge were down. Heller was neutralized. His exit from this outcrop was blocked in 2 directions. He looked at Mara, then at Montgomery, then back at Mara. "You planned this," he said, and there was something in his voice that was almost improbably respect. "I plan everything," she said. "Drop the pistol, right now, last time I ask." He didn't drop it. He raised it, and Eli came over the top of the ridge. Not running, not scrambling, moving, deliberately, the way Montgomery had taught him on the South Trail, low and angled, using the rock as cover until the last possible moment. In his hands was the small rifle Montgomery kept in the root cellar for emergencies, the one Mara had not told him about, and he had apparently found on his own. He was 9 years old, and he came over that ridge like he'd been doing it for years, and he placed himself in a position that put him crosswise to Kane's angle, and he held the rifle with the steadiness of someone who had been paying very close attention every single time an adult near him had handled a firearm. "Sir," he said to Kane. His voice was absolutely level. "I'd really like you to put that down." Kane stared at the boy. Something moved through his face that was harder to read than anything else he'd shown, complicated and involuntary, the expression of a man who had built an entire edifice of reasoning around the idea that children were leverage, who was now confronting a child who had removed himself from that category entirely. "Son," Kane said. "I'm not your son," Eli said. "Drop it." The pistol came down. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces, the way a man conceded things he'd never intended to concede degree by degree as the reality of a situation pressed against his will until the will gave. Kane lowered the gun. He set it on the rock. He took his hand away from it. Montgomery crossed to him in 4 steps and had his wrists behind his back before the man could reconsider. Mara breathed. Then she crossed to Eli in 3 steps, and she put both hands on the sides of his face. And she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because there was nothing that needed to be said that wasn't already visible. Then she pulled him into her one arm around his shoulders, and she held him there on top of that ridge in the Idaho cold, and she felt him hold her back. Not like a frightened child holding its mother, but like a person choosing to hold another person, deliberate and certain, and mutual. "I told you root cellar," she said into the top of his head. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." A pause. "No, ma'am. I'm not really." She almost laughed. She didn't. It wasn't the right moment, but something in her chest did something adjacent to it, bright and sharp and entirely unexpected. Montgomery had Kane secured with a length of rope from his coat pocket, the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent years knowing that preparation was what separated outcomes. He looked at Mara over Kane's head, and she looked back at him, and between them was a conversation that didn't need words. The specific understanding of 2 people who had just been through something that changed the geometry of everything that came after. Cole appeared at the base of the ridge, climbing toward them, breathing hard. Behind him, the south trail was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant the thing that needed to be finished had been finished. "Heller," Mara said. "Down," Cole said. "Not dead. The others scattered, they'll run back to wherever Kane keeps people who run." He looked at Kane with an expression she recognized. Not hate. Something colder and more organized than hate. "Rachel," he said. "Where is she?" Kane, to his credit, answered. "Denver. 3rd Street Boarding House, Room 7. She's guarded by 1 man. When I don't wire in by Friday, he'll release her. That was the arrangement." Cole looked at Montgomery. "I've got a telegraph line into Redemption Creek," Montgomery said. "Perkins knows how to reach the federal office in Cheyenne. I've got a name there, a man I trust, one of the few who stayed clean while Kane was operating." He looked at Kane. "And I think Mr. Kane is going to provide us with a considerably detailed account of his land dealings over the last decade, which that federal office has been trying to compile for a very long time." Kane said nothing. "You're going to do that?" Montgomery said, quiet and absolute. "Because the alternative is that I spend the next several years making sure every piece of evidence I collected 8 years ago, every name I documented, every affidavit I held onto, reaches every jurisdiction you've ever operated in simultaneously. And we both know there are men in those jurisdictions who would rather see you removed quietly than have those documents become public." He paused. "So you choose, controlled and legal, or not?" Kane looked at him for a long moment. "You kept the evidence," he said. "I kept everything," Montgomery said. "I've had 8 years and very little else to do." The wind off the ridge pushed between them. Somewhere below, a crow called once and went quiet. "Margaret," Kane said finally. His voice had changed. The boardroom smoothness was gone, and what was underneath it was older and something she couldn't name. "Your wife. I want you to know." He stopped. "Don't," Montgomery said, very quietly. "She didn't suffer," Kane said. "I want you to know that. Whatever else I am, she didn't." The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man receiving something he had needed for a very long time and did not know how to hold. Montgomery's jaw worked. His hands on the rope binding Kane's wrists tightened and then released. "Take him down," he said to Cole. His voice had changed, too stripped of something hollowed slightly, the voice of a man who had been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to set it down, and was only now discovering that setting it down had its own particular quality of pain. Cole moved Kane toward the ridge descent. Mara stood beside Montgomery, and she did not say anything for a moment. She let the silence do what silence could do when it was the right kind. Then Montgomery said very quietly, "She would have liked you." She looked at him. His eyes were on the valley below, on the white expanse of the mountain they'd just held together. His face was not peaceful. Not yet, but tilted toward it, the way a compass needle tilted, pulled by something it had spent a long time looking for. "She sounds like someone worth liking," Mara said. He nodded once. Then he looked at Eli, who was standing nearby with the rifle held correctly at his side, watching the ridge descent with the focused attention he gave to everything practical. "That was a reckless thing you did," Montgomery said to the boy. Eli looked at him. "Yes, sir. Reckless and unnecessary, and you disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." "And it worked," Montgomery said. Eli held his gaze. "Yes, sir, it did." Something happened on Montgomery's face that she had not seen there before, full and unguarded, the expression of a man whose defenses had come down not because someone had broken them, but because he'd found for the first time in a long time that he didn't need them. He put his hand on Eli's shoulder. Brief, solid, certain. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." They went down the ridge together, the man and the woman and the boy with the cold at their backs, and the cabin smoke visible below rising straight in the still air. The way smoke rose when there was no more wind to push it sideways, when the worst of the storm had passed, and whatever was left was just weather ordinary and survivable. They brought Kane down the mountain on foot, his wrists bound, walking ahead of Montgomery's rifle, with the particular posture of a man who had spent his whole life moving the world by force of will, and had finally run out of world to move. Cole walked beside him close enough to react far enough to make clear this was no escort, this was a custody. Mara walked with Eli. He didn't hold her hand. He was 9, and he'd faced down Donovan Kane on a ridgeline with a rifle, and hand-holding wasn't in that boy's register anymore. But he walked close enough that their arms touched with every other step, and she let that be what it was, contact chosen sufficient. "Are we in trouble?" he asked about halfway down. "For the shooting." "Define trouble," she said. "Legal trouble." "No," she said, "we're not." "How do you know?" "Because Kane is going to talk," she said. "Men like him always talk when the alternative is worse than talking. And when he talks everything he's done to us, to your father's land, to Rachel Cole, to Montgomery's wife, all of it becomes somebody else's problem to sort out. And we come out the right side of it." Eli was quiet for a moment. "And if he doesn't talk, Montgomery kept 8 years of evidence in a locked box under the floorboards of that cabin," she said. "A man who does that doesn't need cooperation. He just needs a federal judge." Another silence. Then, "He's careful," Eli said, "about Montgomery, not a question." "Yes," she said, "like you." She looked at her son. "Yes," she said, "like me." He nodded, filing it away, in that particular way of his. And she watched him do it, and she thought, this is working. Whatever this is, this strange cold mountain bolt on the door, knives at the table arrangement, it is working, and Eli can feel it, and that is the only measure that has ever mattered. Redemption. Creek had not seen anything like it. Perkins met them at the edge of town, which meant someone had been watching the mountain. Probably Mrs. Aldrich from the boarding house, who it turned out watched everything and sold some of what she saw, and kept the rest for her own considerable purposes. He took one look at Kane, bound and walking, and then one long look at Montgomery, and his face did something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite satisfaction, but lived in the territory between them. "I'll get Hearst," he said. "Get the telegraph office first," Montgomery said. "I need to send a wire to Cheyenne. Marshal William Cord, Federal Division. Tell him Tobias Montgomery has Donovan Kane in custody and requires immediate jurisdiction transfer." Perkins looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating several assumptions simultaneously. "You were a marshal," he said. "Deputy," Montgomery said. "Past tense. But Cord owes me a debt that predates all of this, and he has not forgotten it." Perkins went. The town turned out the way small towns turned out for anything that broke the ordinary shape of a day. Not all at once, not with announcement, but gradually door by door the population of Redemption Creek, finding reasons to be in the direction of the main street as word moved through it with the particular speed that only gossip achieved. They came to their doorways and they watched, and they saw Donovan Kane in rope bindings being walked through their town by a woman with a pistol at her hip, and a man they'd written off as a permanent hermit, and the 9-year-old boy between them who walked like he'd earned the right to be exactly where he was. Mara did not look at the people in the doorways. She didn't need their reaction, and she didn't seek it. But she felt it, the recalibration happening in real time. The collective story this town had told itself about the man on that mountain shifting into something it had not been before. They put Kane in the back room of the sheriff's office, which was technically occupied by a man named Briggs, who had no particular relationship with courage, but understood when a situation had moved past his ability to manage it. He surrendered his keys to Montgomery with the air of a man grateful for the excuse. The wait for the federal wire back from Cheyenne took 4 hours. In those 4 hours, 3 things happened. The first was that Kane asked to speak to Mara alone. Montgomery vetoed it immediately, which she overruled, which produced a brief exchange of looks between them that was the first genuine argument they'd had, and lasted approximately 45 seconds before they reached a compromise. She went in. Montgomery stood outside the door. It stayed open 2 inches. Kane was sitting with his back against the far wall, wrists still bound, and he looked at her with those careful eyes that hadn't lost all their intelligence, even stripped of their power. And he said, "The land trust document, the one I told you about." "What about it?" she said. "It's forged," he said. "Entirely. Your boy's father never signed anything. I had a man who was very good at signatures produce it after the fact." He paused. "I'm telling you this because it's going to come out in the federal proceedings regardless, and I'd rather tell you myself than have you hear it from a lawyer." He looked at her with something that was difficult to categorize, not remorse exactly, but the acknowledgement of remorse as a concept that existed. "The boy has no obligation to me. He never did. The legitimate trust, the one his father actually established, names Eli as sole beneficiary. I never touched the original document. I didn't have to because no one knew it existed except the man who drafted it, and that man had enough of his own problems with me to keep his mouth shut." Mara stood very still. "Where is the original document?" she said. "Denver. A lawyer named Ferris on Colfax Avenue. He's been holding it for 3 years waiting for someone to come asking." He met her eyes. "I imagine he'll be hearing from you shortly." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm going to prison," he said simply. "For a considerable time. And when a man is facing a considerable time, he starts making calculations about what he wants his ledger to look like." He shrugged slightly. "The boy never did anything to me. He's 9 years old. Whatever else I am, I don't carry debts against 9-year-olds. She turned and walked out without another word. Montgomery was waiting. He read her face. "What?" he said. She told him. Quietly, quickly, all of it. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Eli has legal claim to the land." "And money," she said. "His father's estate. Kane never actually touched it, he just made everyone believe he had." Another silence. "That boy," Montgomery said very quietly, "has been running for 2 years from a man who had nothing real on him." "Yes," she said. Something moved through his face. Not anger, though anger was in there, but larger than anger. The feeling that contained anger and grief and relief simultaneously, the specific quality of a weight being removed that you'd carried so long, you'd forgotten what it was like to stand up straight. "We need to get to Denver," she said. "We will," he said. "After Cord gets here, and this is settled properly." The second thing that happened in those 4 hours was Eli sitting in the corner of the sheriff's office outer room with the old rifle across his knees, asked Montgomery, "Did you always know you'd go back to being a lawman someday?" Montgomery looked at the boy. He'd taken the chair nearest the window, which Mara recognized as a positioning choice, not a comfort choice. "No," he said. "But you kept the evidence," Eli said. "For 8 years." "Yes. That's what a lawman does," Eli said. "Keeps the evidence, waits for the right moment." Montgomery was quiet for a moment. "I suppose it is," he said. "So you knew," Eli said, "even when you thought you didn't." Montgomery looked at the boy with an expression that had become familiar to Mara over the past 10 days, the look of a man who kept being surprised by what came out of Eli's mouth and who was choosing each time to take it seriously rather than minimize it, because it was coming from a child. "You might be right," he said. "I usually am," Eli said. "My mom says it's annoying." And Tobias Montgomery, for the first time since Mara had come to his mountain, laughed. Full and real and unexpected, the laugh of a man who hadn't done it in long enough that the sound surprised even himself. She heard it from the doorway and stopped and listened to it, and she thought, "There he is. There's the man that Mountain's been keeping." The third thing that happened was Cole found her outside the sheriff's office and said, "I'm going to Denver tonight." "I know," she said. "Rachel's going to need—" He stopped, collected himself. "She's been through something. She's going to need time." "Yes," Mara said. "She is." She looked at him. "You saved our lives today, Cole. Whatever else happens that matters. That gets remembered." He looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. "She talked about you like you were worth saving," he said. "I figured she knew something I didn't." "She did," Mara said. "She usually will." He left on the evening stage. Marshal Cord arrived from Cheyenne 47 hours later, which was fast enough that Mara understood Montgomery had not been exaggerating about the nature of the debt owed. Cord was a lean, deliberate man in his 50s, with the kind of face that had been weathered into permanent neutrality, and eyes that took in a room and categorized it without appearing to move. He shook Montgomery's hand for a long time. He did not explain the length of the handshake, and Montgomery did not require explanation. He took Kane into formal federal custody with the efficiency of a man who had been wanting to do exactly this for a considerable number of years. Kane's confession, when it came, offered in exchange for trial in a jurisdiction of his choosing. The only card he had left to play was 47 pages. It named 19 individuals in land fraud schemes spanning 6 states. It named 3 sitting county officials who had taken money to look the wrong direction at the right moments. It contained a full account of what had happened to Margaret Montgomery on a road outside Cheyenne, including the names of the 2 men who had arranged it, one of whom was still alive, and found himself in federal custody within the month. It also formally and legally nullified every claim against the Sullivan estate. Cord handed Mara the document personally in the lobby of the sheriff's office, with Montgomery standing at her shoulder and Eli sitting on the front step outside where she could see him through the window. "You should know," Cord said, "that what you did on that mountain, all 3 of you, is going to take considerable explaining in the formal report." "I expect it will," she said. "Montgomery." He looked at the man beside her. "I'd like to discuss something with you when there's time. I have a proposition." Montgomery looked at him. "What kind?" "The kind that involves a badge," Cord said. "The federal kind this time, with proper authority and proper backup, both of which you should have had 8 years ago." He paused. "Think about it." He left them with that. Mara looked at Montgomery. "A federal badge," she said. "He's mentioned it before," Montgomery said. "In letters. I didn't answer. And now—" He was quiet for a moment. She waited, which she'd learned was the only useful thing to do when he was working his way toward something real. "I've been waiting 8 years, he said. "I told you that. Waiting for Kane to make a mistake big enough. Waiting to finish what I started." He paused. "It's finished. And I'm standing here trying to figure out what a man does when the thing he's been waiting for is done." She looked at him. "What does he want to do?" she said. "Not what should he do. What does he want?" He turned and looked through the window at Eli on the front step, who had found a piece of string from somewhere and was doing something methodical and focused with it, the way he did things when he thought no one was watching. Unself-consciously, with the particular ease of a child who had begun in small increments to feel safe. "I want to teach that boy to track," Montgomery said. "In spring when the ground thaws. There's a method reading sign in soft ground that I've never shown anybody because there's been nobody worth showing." He paused. "I want to fix the east-facing shutter that your arrival apparently broke." Another pause. "And I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever answer you give, I'll accept it, and nothing between us will change because of it." Her heart did something deliberate and unhurried. "Ask," she said. He turned from the window and looked at her directly the way he did everything, without approach, without embellishment, straight at the thing itself. "Stay," he said, "not because you need high ground, not because you need distance from the road, because you want to, because this—" He stopped, started again. "Because what we built in 10 days on that mountain is something I have not had in 8 years and did not expect to have again. And I am not willing to lose it to geography or circumstance if there's any chance you feel the same." The lobby of the Redemption Creek Sheriff's Office was not a romantic setting by any reasonable standard. It smelled of old wood and gun oil, and the particular staleness of a room that had held too many people with too many problems. Outside, the main street was muddy with late-season thaw. Through the window, Eli had fashioned his piece of string into something that might have been a figure-8 knot and was examining it with the satisfaction of a solved problem. None of that mattered. "I feel the same," she said, simply without decoration, the way she said true things. "I have felt the same since the second morning when you made enough coffee for 2 without being asked." Something in his face opened. Not dramatically, he was not a dramatic man, but visibly fully, the way a room opened when someone finally unlocked the right window and let the actual air in. "The coffee was strategic," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why it worked." They went back to the mountain the next morning, all 3 of them with Perkins and his mule, and considerably more supplies than they'd come down with, because Montgomery had spent part of the previous afternoon in the general store with the focused efficiency of a man restocking for a longer stay than the one he'd originally provisioned for. Eli noticed. He said nothing. But he noticed, and the noticing produced a quality of quiet in him that was different from his usual quiet. Not the watchful holding still of a child bracing for disruption, but something settled. Something that had found its footing and recognized the ground beneath it as solid. On the trail up about halfway, he fell into step beside Montgomery. "Sir," he said. Montgomery said, which Mara had come to understand was his version of "go ahead." "When you teach me to track," Eli said, "will you also teach me the other things, the trapping, the responsible kind," you said, "and how to read the mountains in winter?" And he paused, and she heard him organize whatever was underneath the question into something he was willing to say out loud. "The things you would have taught someone if you'd had someone to teach." Montgomery walked in silence for a moment. "Yes," he said. "All of it." Eli nodded. One firm nod, the nod of a deal confirmed. "Okay," he said, then carefully, with the particular caution of a child who understood that some words carried weight and needed to be set down correctly. "Is it all right if I call you something other than sir?" Montgomery stopped walking. Mara kept her pace, kept her eyes on the trail ahead, kept her face exactly where it was, because this was not her moment, and she knew it, and she would not crowd it for anything. "What did you have in mind?" Montgomery said. A pause. "I don't know yet," Eli said. "I just wanted to know if it was all right to figure it out." Another silence, long enough that the mountain wind filled it, came through. It moved on. "It's all right," Montgomery said. His voice had done that thing again, stripped down the unnecessary parts, gone just the truth of what it carried. "Take whatever time you need." They walked the rest of the trail without talking, and the quiet between the 3 of them was the best kind of quiet, not absence, not avoidance, but fullness. The sound of people who had said the necessary things and had earned the right to let the rest come in its own time. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Cole. Rachel was home. She was well shaken and thinner, and carrying something in her eyes that would take time to set down, but alive and home. And already Cole wrote asking questions about the future, with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had decided not to let what happened to her be the last thing that defined her. Mara read the letter at the table. Montgomery was at the stove. Eli was outside by choice, learning to read the snow, the way his teacher had shown him moving slowly around the yard, with his eyes down and his attention complete. She read the last line of Cole's letter twice. She said to tell Mrs. Sullivan, "I knew you were worth it. I'd do it again." Mara set the letter down. She did not cry. She had not cried in a very long time, and she was not going to start over a letter, no matter how much the words in it deserved it. But she sat with her hands flat on the table, and she breathed, and she felt the full weight of the last 2 years settle into its proper place. Not gone, not forgotten, not the wound it had been, but resolved. Accounted for. Part of a story that had turned out against all reasonable probability to be one worth surviving. Good news, Montgomery said, not turning from the stove. He could read a room without looking at it, which was one of the things she'd filed away about him in the early days, and had since stopped filing because it had become simply part of what she knew. "Yes," she said. "Cole, Rachel's home," she said. He set down the spoon, turned around, looked at her with those pale, direct eyes. "Good," he said. One word full of everything it contained. Outside, Eli called out, not in alarm, in triumph. "I found it. The deer came through here this morning. I can see the drag mark from the hind leg." Montgomery moved to the door, opened it. "Which direction?" he called back. "East, toward the tree line." "That's right," Montgomery called. "Now tell me how long ago." A pause. The sound of Eli moving, crouching, examining. Then, 2 hours, maybe 3. The edges are starting to, what's the word? Crust, Montgomery said. The edges crust when the cold sets into disturbed snow. Crust. Eli repeated, committing it. 2 hours. The edges are starting to crust. Good, Montgomery said. "Come in. Coffee's ready." The sound of boots on frozen ground, quick and purposeful. And then Eli came through the door, with cold, reddened cheeks and the expression of someone who had just added a real thing to their store of real knowledge, and he went straight to the table and sat down and looked at his mother and said, "I'm getting good at this." "Yes," she said. "You are." He looked at Montgomery with that expression she'd first seen on the ridge, certain, direct, unburdened by unnecessary modesty. "I want to learn the spring tracking next. You said the soft ground is different." "It is," Montgomery said, pouring 3 cups. "Will you show me?" "Every day until you don't need me to," he said. Eli nodded, satisfied. Then he wrapped both hands around his cup, the way Montgomery did. It had started 3 days ago. The mimicry, quiet and unconscious, the way children absorbed the people they'd chosen to trust. And he looked out the window at his yard, his mountain, his morning. And he said simply, "I like it here." And Mara Sullivan, who had driven a knife into a man's throat on a Tuesday and climbed a mountain in December and held a pistol on Donovan Kane and loved a boy through 2 years of running and found a man worth the stopping, looked at her son and looked at the man across the table and felt the last of the fugitive leave her body like a long exhale, clean and complete and entirely finally done. "So do I," she said. And that mountain which had swallowed 24 women and sent them back to the valley empty-handed, which had been called dangerous and isolating, and the private ruin of a grief-broken man, that mountain kept them. All 3 of them. Because the woman who had finally climbed it had not come to be chosen. She had come to choose. And everything that followed was simply the world catching up to what she'd already decided. That was the kind of woman Mara Sullivan was. And from that day forward, on that mountain, that was enough.